I don't think I've ever been so disappointed by a game demo before. Okay, well, I'm not entirely disappointed, but certainly let down a bit. Let me clarify here. Star Overdrive is an upcoming indie game where you explore an open world with a hoverboard. You fight monsters, solve puzzles, and get some useful abilities throughout the game. Based on that description and the gameplay I saw, I was immediately hooked. So as I waited for the game's release, they dropped a demo by the end of February. I was hoping to get the game on PC, but it's supposedly a timed exclusive on Switch, so the demo's only released on there. Alright, I don't mind. I'm expecting the usual downgrades, so I'll just adapt to it. I just want to give the game a test drive to see what I'm in for. But wow, this had some obvious drawbacks, and it's pretty rough. Literally right in the opening sequence, breaking this big chunk of gems caused a hard frame drop that you simply can't ignore. Menus and tutorials had some assets clearly scaled down to a lower resolution. Looking at your board in the pause menu was ridiculously low res. It almost looks like a pixelated filters on it, and when traveling around, you're bound to experience some hitches or pauses in the frame rate. The game was certainly not hitting a locked 30 FPS, and with the small hitches combined with the frequent hit stop for certain actions, the game felt jittery in performance overall. Doesn't help that there's some pop-in as well, both for the environment and certain objects. Sure, I got used to it in time, but as a game partially exclusive to Switch, it wasn't a good look. And putting aside the technical compromises, the game wasn't as polished as I expected. Menus looked cheap with having no real transitions between them. Opening the map abruptly cuts off any music or noise from the gameplay. Animations for your character were mostly good, but there's a very noticeable lack of facial animation. When he falls from a rough landing, he just blankly stares. No hurt look, and not even any eye movement. When getting a new ability, the animation looks nice, but he's always just vacantly looking through it all. I found it kinda funny, but it's also just uncanny. And the main character is also a silent protagonist, which I'm mostly fine with. But with all the tricks, the more expressive animations, and even the more personal connection to the game's story, you'd think this guy would have at least some vocal delivery. It leaves certain moments in cutscenes feeling a bit empty. The distress signal is clearly urgent, but the lack of dialogue makes the importance of it a bit unclear. This close escape feels less impactful when there's no vocal feedback from the character. There is personality and emotion here, but you can only do so much with just animation. During gameplay, everything looks good for the most part, but some things clearly need a bit of fixing. The attacks on this mini-boss just look off and even a bit unfinished. The attack isn't very clear and it abruptly snaps your animation to a dive, which makes it look like you're standing in mid-air. In fact, the stun animation actually does have you standing in mid-air. It's just hidden by this blast aura thing. Once the camera moves, you're quite literally just standing there, and then you go into a freefall. And look, I know this is an abandoned desert planet I'm exploring, and I know that the full game will probably have more distinct environments, but the area you can explore here looks really bland. It doesn't help that the environment detail looks kinda rough from high up. These red patches of grass all have these blocky edges to them like a low-res texture, and aside from the same glass dome sprinkled around, nothing really catches my eye here. I'm hoping there's more small points of interest to find, but this first area doesn't seem so promising. The mining points also look pretty basic. The terrain is weirdly blocky looking, and they're oddly spacious for what's meant to be a mining point. Now the gameplay was where I was most interested. There may be some issues graphically, but I'll tolerate it if the game's worth playing through. And it's mostly worth it, but it still has some issues. The demo only covers the starting area of the game. Your objective is to activate this tower by heading to 3 mining points, obtaining some new abilities, and completing their short challenges. You can freely explore the map, collect materials, fight some creatures, or solve some puzzles for special items. Mining points provide nodes for your skill tree, and materials can be used for upgrading your hoverboard. Structurally, the game works well. Progression is clear, but open enough for you to mess around and find things for yourself. The restricted freedom of the demo doesn't leave much for interesting places, but again, it's probably fixed in the full game. But right from the opening, the inspiration for this game is super obvious. You start in a narrow hallway with an essential item, see a wide view of the world, find a tower, and visit 3 points that provide new abilities and short challenges. Clearly, this game takes a lot of cues from another open world game. Elden Ring. I'm kidding, obviously, it's Breath of the Wild. Now, taking inspiration from that game is not bad. In fact, it's nothing new. Plenty of other games have done it at this point. But as someone who's completely enjoyed Breath of the Wild and its sequel, Tears of the Kingdom, I already had my fill on the formula. I wanted something new with the open world format, and unfortunately, Star Overdrive didn't really seem to do much new. It was awfully similar to Breath of the Wild, to the point of it being almost derivative to me. The opening was similar, collecting items was similar, the game over screen and jingle were similar, even the mining point activation was practically one-to-one with the shrines, and their structure clearly takes heavy inspiration from Zelda, down to even having one chest hidden per shrine. And just by the tile screen alone, it's like the exact same. It was so appalling to me how closely they made certain aspects that it kinda took most of my excitement away, because I already had a good idea of how the game was gonna go. It's not like everything is exactly like Breath of the Wild. Obviously, there's some major distinctions and unique ideas, but it was just really deflating to expect a new take on the open world with a hoverboard, only for it to be kinda the same deal with what I've played before. Granted, it's not a bad formula to follow, and it is still enjoyable, but I just wish it didn't take so much from Zelda. Unfortunately, the game has even more issues than I expected. Not major ones, but a bunch of smaller ones that pile up. Why are game over screens present when they really shouldn't be? Drowning just resets me to the last land point with my health low, so why is there a game over screen between that all? Why do I always walk around while strafing? It makes moving in any direction that isn't forwards much slower, and I'm not always aiming at something to require strafing. It also makes sprinting in all directions impossible without a workaround, which feels limiting for no good reason. Also, why is sprinting an unlockable skill? Normal movement is so slow that I feel like a sprint should be unlocked by default. Combat is kinda weird when starting out. 1 or 2 enemies is easy to deal with, but when there's more to focus on, it's easy to get overwhelmed. And when you've got some monsters throwing explosives, things can get even worse. Your health also regenerates extremely slowly, so any damage taken is a big punishment for the entire fight. It doesn't help that your defensive options are practically non-existent. But once you've got some powers unlocked, specifically this magnet grabbing move, combat is now completely one-sided. It's so powerful that you might as well ignore your normal attacks unless you're out of energy. It makes combat more methodical, which is fine, but it wasn't what I was expecting from a game like this. Also, when you defeat an enemy, it has a chance of just exploding afterwards, and I don't understand why. The tutorials for this workbench could have been a bit better. I don't like how some things are explained after you've already done something. For example, why tell me that this rare material grants a new ability after I've created the part? And why tell me that a new paint customization grants bonus stats after I've made it? I would have liked to know that beforehand, especially when it comes to using rare materials. I might end up crafting a part which could have been better on something else, and I'd rather not worry about wasting a limited resource. There's also just an odd lack of polish in some areas which clearly need some attention. Ignoring this small tower during the intro just forcibly teleports you to it. There's this odd cut I saw when exiting a mining point. During this race, I phased through this metal ramp for some reason, and in that same race, you're directed to ride along this metal curve, but it slows you down a lot. I feel like they expected you to either do a trick off of it, or thought you already had a part to ride along smoothly. Either way, it's not properly indicated and feels like I'm doing something wrong by following a clear path. Also, jumping off metal ramps gives noticeably higher jumps and speed than what I should actually be given. I'm not sure if that's just a hidden trait of theirs, but they clearly slow you down, so where's the extra height coming from? And why does water still slow you down when I've clearly jumped over it? There's just a lot more issues than I expected to see here. I wasn't expecting something perfect, but definitely not a bunch of these smaller issues. Maybe in the full game they flesh all these things out, but what I've experienced in the demo hasn't been very promising. But I can't say everything sucked. There were still plenty of things I did enjoy which kept me playing. Just riding around and doing tricks on your hoverboard was really entertaining. I can see it getting repetitive if it's the same thing over 20 hours of playtime, but I'm hoping some new abilities or gimmicks are introduced to shake things up a bit. The race for one challenge was definitely a good highlight. Sure, I was a bit annoyed having to upgrade my board just to finish the race, but I'm glad I felt a difference in my stats afterwards. The race was an engaging challenge that I really wanted more of, and I'm hoping there's more of these challenges rather than the underground puzzles. The customization was a no-brainer for a game like this, and although you don't have much to mess with in the demo, I did appreciate having some bonus stats for simply changing a few things. I found the physics of the game to be solid, but I just found it funny to mess with the ragdoll physics after falling. It makes you look like a drunk who's lost it all, and some of the glitches I found with it were pretty amusing. I think my favorite part of the demo overall was definitely the optional mini-boss you can fight. It's just an amazing combination of your abilities along with a thrilling chase to keep things energetic. It's also just managing so many things all at once, which was a great challenge. There's the rocks you have to dodge, your attacks which you have to time correctly, your energy meter which requires tricks to refill. It's just a really fun boss fight. I'm hoping that there's more of this throughout the game, but we only get one boss fight in the demo. Other things like the camera work and music were pretty good. I mean, I can't say too much about the music since most of it didn't really stick with me, but the tracks for the race and boss fight were really nice, and the camera work for just riding around wasn't half bad either. Again though, the boss was definitely a highlight. But altogether, I'm unfortunately not as excited for Star Overdrive as I was before. Don't get me wrong, I'm still looking forward to the game, but with all these problems spread throughout the first 2 hours, it has definitely tempered my expectations. And with the game being open world, I have a bad feeling that the concept's gonna be drawn out in some way, which I'm not sure I'll enjoy. I'm certainly not playing this on Switch, and unfortunately a PC version's gonna have to wait since it's a timed exclusive, so once it does finally jump to Steam, I'll probably get it then. maybe when there's a discount. I'm really hoping the issues are ironed out when that time comes, but that's probably more than a year out, given how timed exclusives work. Well, until then, I'm wishing luck to the dev team and the game's launch. If you want to see more videos, here's a few to choose from. Subscribe and do all the YouTube stuff if you liked the video, and I'll see you later.